Hello, and welcome to the nonprofit world, where we highlight organizations and individuals who are passionate about empowering people to make a difference in the lives of others, in our community and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, your host for today's program. And with me today, I am delighted to have Professor Emeritus Leslie Desmangles. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. You did a good job.
Good, good.
Yeah.
It's so nice to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Professor Desmangles was in the Department of Religion and International Studies program at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. How long were you professor there?
Oh, I taught at Trinity for 40 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So you must have liked it.
Yes,
stay that
I did.
Long.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Wonderful. And you were born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
That's right.
And you came to the United States in 1960 and became a U.S. citizen. So
Correct.
You've been here since 1960. And tell us what brought you to the United States?
Well, my father had sent all three boys, because we were three boys in the family. We all studied abroad. And so my brother had gone to Montreal, and my other brother went to Germany, became a physician in Germany, and then I was sent to Canada, to Montreal as well. But I left home, I was 13, and went home to went to a private boarding school in Montreal, and I was there for 4 years, and then came to the US in 1960. Then for my schooling, went to 4 years of college and then graduate schools.
Okay. And you have a Bachelor of Arts degree in music.
Yes, correct.
What took you to the music?
Well, I've always loved music, even when I was a child. And I remember I was probably unique, but in high school, I used to listen to the Metropolitan Opera on Saturday afternoon. That was the Texaco Metropolitan Opera program. And so I listened to it quite often, and I took some piano lessons when I was in high school, and also prior to that. So my father was a musician, and so he made sure that all three boys also had an instrument and were familiar with music. So that's the reason why when I went to college, I really wanted to do something else. I was thinking about psychology and philosophy, but then I was just attracted to music again. So I became a music major in my undergraduate years, and then a conducting major.
Wow, wonderful. So did you conduct an orchestra?
No, I conducted choirs.
Choirs, okay.
The college choir. I was assistant conductor of the college choir.
Oh, that's exciting.
So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then you also have a Master of Divinity in Theology.
Yeah, after I finished my BA in music, I went to Palmer Seminary and received my degree in 1967, and then went on to Temple University for a PhD.
Okay, and your PhD is in Anthropology of Religion.
Yes.
With concentration on the Caribbean
and Africa.
And Africa religions. Okay, and we're going to spend some time on that.
Okay.
Talking about that today.
Sure.
And you travel a lot. Continue to travel. You go back and forth to Haiti.
You go back to Haiti quite often, and also to various parts of the Caribbean, because that's really the area, the geographical area that I study mostly. I mean, I do Africa, West Africa, but because I do so much of the Caribbean, I go to the Caribbean quite often in different places in the Caribbean and do some research. I've actually gone to 15 different countries in the Caribbean. So I've traveled quite extensively.
Yes.
And there are quite a few islands there, and some of them nobody has ever heard of because they're so small. But I've been to all the major ones.
And your purpose for going there is to study the religions?
The different religions in the Caribbean, that's what I do, yeah. So I go back to look at the different religions, and sometimes I study the same religion in different places, but I try to find out how different it is as you go from one island to the other.
And what are the major religions in the Caribbean?
Well, I mean, Christianity is obviously, and all the sects and denominations of Protestantism are there, and they're very prominent. There's no question about that. But you also have religions that were imported from Africa that have been brought in, and these are Vodou, Santeria, and then a relatively new one, Rastafari, which started in Jamaica back in the 1930s, which has spread quite a bit throughout the world and certainly throughout the Caribbean. So these are the major ones. But then there were also imported religions. You also had Judaism that was brought in from Europe, and that goes back to the 17th century. People don't know that, but there's synagogues in the Caribbean. And you also have Hinduism that was brought into the Caribbean from India, South India actually, back in the 19th century, about 1830 and onward. And so Islam also was brought in about the same time. So there were some imports that came from other places. The Caribbean generally is very, very culturally diverse and religiously diverse. And it can teach a lot about diversity to the United States.
That's great. That's not a very big area, but it sounds like it's full of culture and religion and a variety of
religious traditions.
Yes.
Coming from different parts of the world.
Yes,
Oh, certainly.
that's wonderful. So one of the things that you've focused a lot on is the voodooism.
Yes, correct.
So what is can you give us a little history of voodooism? How did it begin? When did it begin?
Well, let me just say that
begin?
it has nothing, voodoo had nothing to do with sticking pins in dolls.
Okay.
Let's start there. And the word itself, the word voodoo, comes from West Africa. And it comes from a little region of West Africa, which today is called the Republic of Benin. But back in the colonial days, it was called Dahomey. It's a very, very small country, which is about 7 degrees north of the equator. It's right under the bulge, you know, if you look at the map of Africa.
Okay.
And in fact, voodoo is still practiced there. But it's a little differently practiced in the Caribbean, obviously, because changes have taken place through history and through time. But the word itself, the word voodoo, comes from the word vodun, which actually means spirit. That's all the word means. So it would mean then that when people who are voodooists, these are people who gather to revere or to worship or revere the spirits, and the spirits essentially are the gods. But the religion itself by nature is monotheistic. There's only one God. But it's just that the God has different faces, different personalities, and these personalities are represented by different gods. But it's all these different gods, maybe 100 or so, are all part of the one. So it's not what you call a polytheistic religion, meaning a religion that has many, many gods. Not really. It does, but all of the gods are part of the one.
Okay, that's interesting. So all the things that we see in the movies with the dolls and the pins, none of that is part of what they practice?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And if you were to go with me, as I did my field research in Haiti, and you were to talk to a voodoo priest and say, do you have any dolls? And say, well, of course we have dolls. Do you stick pins in them? And then they probably say, they probably have no idea what you're talking about. Okay. But no, it's not. That's not it.
Not it at all. Okay. You have written a book, published a book called "The Faces of the Gods: Voodoo and the Roman
Catholicism.
Yeah. Thank you. In Haiti. And that book has in 1994, won a Choice Academic Outstanding Book. So can you tell us a little bit about what's in the book? Do you talk about the rituals of voodooism and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm particularly interested to see how Roman Catholicism was incorporated within voodoo practice and voodoo belief. So I traced the history of voodoo and the Roman Catholicism and see the parallels between them and see how one got to be connected and got to be involved in the other one, incorporated in the other one. So essentially that's what the book is about. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things I need to say is that historically, voodooists are also Roman Catholics. I mean, people don't think about that. And the reason is because these are people who practice two religions simultaneously, voodoo and Roman Catholicism. They go to the voodoo temple, they do things that are required of them by the religion, by the tradition, But they also go to the Catholic Church, they attend Mass, their children are confirmed there, they take First Communion, they're buried there, they do all the things that the Catholic Church requires at the same time. So they do practice two religions in quite marvelous way and very creative way. And I might add in parenthesis that this is not at all unusual in various parts of the world that people practice more than one religion simultaneously. That's very common throughout the world.
Is that right? Okay. What other religions are practiced simultaneously, do you?
Well, in the Caribbean, certainly Santeria would be a religion much like Voodoo, which is also practiced, where people are also Roman Catholic, and they also they practice this religion, you know, the Santeria religion. In Brazil, Candomblé is another religion, and Candomblé, which is very similar to Santeria and Voodoo, also people are Roman Catholic. But if we leave the Caribbean, South America area and move on to other places, you're going to find that in Asia, for example, a lot of people in China and in Hong Kong and Taiwan who practice Confucianism, also practice Buddhism, and they also practice something called Taoism, and they practice all three at the same time. And in fact, in much of Taiwan, the Confucianist temple may very well be a Taoist and Buddhist temple at the same time, and the priest does all three.
Is that
And
right?
the reason is because people see life in quite a diverse way, and each religion takes care of something that is different, a different aspect, a different dimension of life. For example, Taoism in Taiwan would have something to do with China, has something to do with the one's relationship, my relationship to the environment. Confucianism is a religion of social etiquette. How do I treat my neighbor? How do I treat my children? How do I treat the elderly? And my ancestors, it's very important, those who have passed on. The respect and the reverence that I must have with them. Whereas Buddhism is primarily introspective because it has to do with what is within me. And I have to realize and come to my own spiritual enlightenment. So these are three dimensions of life, and the three dimensions of life are handled by three different religions, and people recognize that these three dimensions are important.
Okay, all right. What are some of the rituals within Voodooism?
Well, the rituals, the people who practice these religions do not practice it every Saturday or Sunday. You don't have rituals every week. If anything, you have the rituals every maybe 3 or 4 times or 3 times a year. But it's a religion that's practiced mostly in the home. But when the rituals are offered, they're offered primarily to the spirits. And they're usually offered during a period of drought, when there is a social problem, when somebody's sick, if there's a hurricane that's gone through, or something to that effect that in fact has affected the community in one way or another. And the rituals are very simple. I mean, they decide which god, which spirit they're going to revere for the evening, and there may be 3 or 4 of them, and it involves essentially each god has its own songs, its own hymns, its own rhythm in the drum, and the drummer has to know all the different rhythms, and therefore they have to have a lot of knowledge about the religion, and that it involves then singing the songs. Dancing is very important, and playing of instruments sometimes also is important to the gods, and it also involves some spirit possession. Spirit possession is a spiritual accomplishment, you might say, where the spirit is said to leave his or her abode and comes into the person, and the person then at that point then speaks out and then talks to the community. And for all intents and purposes, when the spirit comes into the person's body, the person becomes that spirit at that moment. So the person is no longer at home, as it were. It's a spirit that resides within the person. And I often say, when you go to the Catholic Church, you go to worship God. When you go to a Voodoo temple, you go to become God. And spirit possession only lasts just a few minutes, and it doesn't involve exorcism because it is not usually a bad spirit, and people welcome it. And in fact, the spirit that comes usually has something very important to say to the community, something instructive to the community, something that entices the community to be more spiritual and to pay attention to spiritual matters. So the spirit is welcome, and it only stays for a while, and then the spirit goes back and the person returns back to himself or herself. But one of the things that's important in spiritual possession is since the spirit is within the person actually, in becoming the spirit, acts like what's imagined the spirit would act. So in other words, takes on the personality of the spirit.
But it's temporary.
It's only temporary, yeah.
Okay.
I also have to add that although I study these religions, I don't practice any of them. I just have to make that very clear.
Yeah, okay. What about, how does magic or witchcraft or sorcery fit in with voodooism?
Witchcraft and sorcery are not really central to the teachings of this religion, but it is practiced. I mean, those of us who study religion, regardless of where we're going to study it, even in the United States, we know that there is a central teaching of the religion, but we also at the same time that there are peripheral practices that depend on the central teachings but are not really part of the doctrine of the religion itself, not officially. So witchcraft and sorcery are different practices that occur on the periphery of these religions but are not central to the religion. It's almost as if to say, if you've gone to an Irish wake, you know, what's going on there, you could say, well, there's a bit of Roman Catholicism there, but is it part of the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church? Is that what the Vatican is actually teaching and including as part of its teaching? And the answer is no. So there are lots of things like that. So religions have several dimensions, and those of us who study religions have to be aware of that. There's a more popularized form that is peripheral to the central doctrine, but you also have the central teachings.
Okay. And then another question I have about the voodooism is we see a lot of, especially in TV shows, a lot of zombie movies or things that have to do with zombies. Does that have to do with voodooism at all?
Well, that's something that a lot of people have talked about. I've done, I don't know, 30 years, 35 years of field research in Haiti, and I've gone way back in the back country. I've never seen a zombie. Although I've mentioned this to people, and a lot of people have claimed that they've seen one. But it's never been proven there was one. There had been some research done on that whole thing. I mean, it's just a totally different kind of field altogether. And there were a couple of articles that were published in a medical journal called The Lancet in Britain about that. And the reason is because some scholars thought perhaps that they could go and study the chemical that was probably used to create zombies. It's a very complex study, other than, let me just simply say that I was very much involved in that at one point in the study of this thing. But let me just simply say that a zombie is created according to the literature by a poison that is given to a person which puts the person in a state of lethargy. And therefore the person then is buried, there's a funeral and so on, and then the zombie maker goes out and gives the antidote, which usually is salt. And this chemical is called tetrodotoxin, which is the kind of chemical that you find in the backbone of a pufferfish during the time of the mating period. And it's highly poisonous, so it has to be given in small doses, small measured doses. And so the scientists were very interested in this particular chemical to find out how it was administered to people to create zombies, because the medical science was interested in using the same chemical for surgery. So that, for example, in brain surgery, where they want the patient to be conscious, and yet at the same time, they want to be able to open the cranium and then poke around to see whether the patient would respond. They also wanted to use it for birthing, so that when women are giving birth to a child, then the child, that they would be conscious but wouldn't feel anything, and therefore birthing would be relatively painless. But there's been no conclusion to the, no conclusive results of that, and so this entire study had been pretty well abandoned. And the reason why it has been abandoned, primarily is because we've not been able to figure out exactly the exact dosage that you must give to a person, and that dosage would vary according to each person, and each person, in other words, would have to have a different dose in order to bring about that state of lethargy. So, in effect, that has completely been abandoned. The other reason why it's been abandoned is because the people who are the zombie maker himself, who is supposedly, and I say this supposedly, administers this chemical, has no way of measuring it because they don't really have graded glasses or anything of the like, and therefore, you know, they probably would administer it, but it's not clear exactly how they do it, and as I said, the dosage itself is also not been established as well.
Okay, all right.
Let me say that this whole idea of zombie exists really mostly in the mythology of the people, and I have a theory about that. There are some places in Haiti where you don't have the police and you don't have the court system, so the people have to administer their own moral structures or their own ethical behavior, and they have to maintain a sense of order when they're in societies in a whole back country. And the way in which they do it is simply to say, look, you're going to behave, and if you start stealing people's things and you're not behaving, we're going to turn you a zombie. And that's the worst thing that can ever happen to a person, because in Haiti, a zombie is, from the point of mythology, used as a slave. These are pariahs. These are people who work on fields, right? And they do what they're told. And since the history of Haiti also involves slavery, right? Africans came as slaves, and people don't want to go back to that.
Right.
So by saying, I'm going to turn you into a zombie, that's a terrible thing that you can tell to a person. And that's one of the ways to keep people on the straight and narrow.
Does it work?
Yeah, of course it does.
Good.
Sure, because people believe it. But I think that's the reason why they've kept this notion. There's also a strong sense of community in these small isolated communities in Haiti. In my field research, I've discovered that when a peasant is doing well in one area, and then 2 houses down, another peasant is not doing so well, meaning that this peasant over here has more carrots and has a smaller family, and the other peasant who has a field where the carrots are not doing too well, but has a much larger family, then the council of elders of that community says to the one who has lots of carrots and a small family, you have to give some of your crops to the other. And if you don't, we'll turn to a zombie.
Oh, wow.
So again, you see, that in fact maintained that sense of social contact, self-help, mutual help, and keeps people on a moral straight and narrow.
Do you see much of that mutual help going on naturally without the government having to step in?
The government doesn't step in at all, because this is done locally. That's
Just
the
locally.
beauty of it,
Okay.
in a sense. So even the idea of a zombie is a terrible notion, but yet on the other hand, it works.
Yeah.
Because it keeps people on the straight and narrow.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, that's very interesting. You've talked a little bit about some of the different religions that go together, but I know Christianity is kind of a unique religion in that you know the claim is that there's one God. And in 3 persons, you know, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then, you know, in Jesus' words and then in the New Testament, it says that, you know, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. So would I be correct to assume that the Christians even in the communities in the Caribbean would not choose to try to combine that with other religions?
Probably not, but I think as far as Vodouist is concerned, their religion is just intertwined with Roman Catholicism, so this wouldn't be a problem. You see, they wouldn't see it that way. But there is something that you mentioned that's interesting. You talk about the Trinity, which is the tri-unity of God, meaning it's 3 in 1. And the way I explain to my students is to say, well, you know, you have water, which is a liquid, you have steam, and you have ice, but it's all water in essence.
Right.
So the mystery, of course, in Christianity is that it's all three at the same time, which we can't explain because that's why it's a mystery. But the point is, my point is, you really have three in one, or one in three, and the Voodooists simply say, well, you know, why not have 100 in one? If you're going to have three, why can't you have 100? And so in that sense, then you might really also claim that Christianity is not a pure monotheism. The pure monotheisms would be Islam and Judaism. But Christianity really is not. So, you know, that may come to a shock to a lot of Christians, but that's the fact. But the other thing I wanted to say too, you know, you also mentioned something else about Christianity or people intermixing religions. Christianity is not pure either. That's one of the fascinating ideas about studying religion, and that's what brought me into that field. Religion is alive. Why is it alive? It's because we are alive, and we make religion, we fabricate religion. The same way that we fabricate culture, and religion is part of culture. And therefore, religion is going to change, and the way in which it changes is when we have influences coming from the outside. We encounter people that are different than we are, with different cultures, and we take some of the things that we think are good for us, and we borrow them and include them in our own way of thinking and our own religion. That's what diversity is about. Christianity is a religion that started out in, you know, in the Middle East, and it made its way southern Europe and went to the Germanic tribe and in the English areas up north in Europe. But as it did, it picked up a whole bunch of stuff which it included in its own practices and its own religious tradition. So it's not a pure religion either. It's very syncretic in the sense that it's fusing a lot of things that have come together, and it's a composite of various religious traditions coming from so-called pagan areas as well.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective on that. What else from your book, The Faces of the Gods? What else would you want to share with us about the Voodoo and the Roman Catholicism in Haiti?
Well, primarily, I mean, I see this connection between those two religions, Voodoo on one hand, Roman Catholicism, based essentially on the, well, first of all, in terms of its history, when the slaves came from Africa and they were brought to the Caribbean, they brought the religion with them. And they came from different parts of Africa, so that Vodou is made up of religious traditions, just as I was saying earlier, that is a composite of various religious traditions coming from different parts of Africa, obviously. And so the religion is a very diverse religion. It's an intermixture of different traditions, because each of the groups of people that came from Yoruba, from Fon, from Ghana, from Congo and other places, they brought their own religions with them. And so all these religions were combined to create a new religion called Vodou. And then that happened perhaps between 1510, 1520, so shortly after Christopher Columbus arrives, when slavery started, until about 1685. And about 1685 onward, then you begin to have a large number of Catholic priests going to the Catholic areas in the Caribbean, the Spanish and the French area and Portuguese area primarily. And that intermixture of religious traditions, African traditions, was already there. And Roman Catholicism became intertwined with it. And so the way it was done, essentially, was done on the basis of certain symbols associated with the Roman Catholic tradition, Catholic saints in particular, that were the same symbols that you also find among the African gods. And on the basis of the similarity between the two, the Catholic saints then were corresponded with the African gods or the voodoo gods. So, for example, Ezuli is the Virgin Mary. Why? Because the Ezuli, her colors are, I mean, the Virgin Mary, her colors are blue and pink. And there are lots of stories told about the Virgin Mary that were the same stories that were also associated with Azuli, who came from Dahomey, from Benin. And on the basis of the two, the same thing happened with St. Patrick. St. Patrick, there's a story in Roman Catholic tradition, they chased the snakes out of Ireland. So snake is associated with St. Patrick. The color green is associated with St. Patrick. In Africa, in Dahomey, or in Benin, the color green is associated with Dambala. And the snake is also associated with Dambala. So the two were merged and came together. So in Vodou, whether you talk about St. Patrick or you talk about Dambala, it's the same person. It's the same God.
Very, very interesting. I hope I can pronounce these correctly. Look into Obia, Voodoo, and Candomblé.
Candomblé.
Yeah. What are the similarities and the differences in those three?
Well, Obia is in Jamaica.
Okay.
And you also find Obia in mostly the British, former British colonies or British islands. It's an intermixture of witchcraft and also intermixture with the use of potions and folk medicine to heal for healing purposes. And there is something like that you're going to find both in Santeria but also in Vodou and Candomblé as well. So that also, I mean, these practices are going to be different as you go from Jamaica to Cuba, to the Dominican Republic, to Brazil. The types of potion are going to be different because the types of plants may be different that are used and so on. But the idea is the same in that the medicinal aspect is a very strong aspect of these religions as well, of all of these religions. So there are some correlations between them, certainly, and in the sense that you do have the medicine men that are going to be certainly present in each of these traditions.
Okay, all right. What role did Voodoo play in Haitian independence?
Yeah, I think it did. I think it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what it was. But I think the religion itself, I think, galvanized the slaves in that it gives them a common sense of purpose. Because they really wanted to get rid of slavery, and they fought very hard to achieve it. But I think the religion itself, I think, inspired them. I also think that there is a particular spirit or God in Vodou, which I think at the time may have had a very important role. This god is a god Ogun. Ogun's origin is actually in Nigeria among the Yoruba people, and it finds its way from the Yoruba people to the Fon people in Benin or Dahomey, and then finally brought with the slaves, with the Africans, when they came over to the New World into Haiti. And also in Santeria, also in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and also in Brazil, Candomblé. But in Haiti, at least, in Vodou, it's the god of war. It's a god of metal. And he's also associated with St. James. And the story is that St. James fought the Moors or the Muslims in Spain. So the war is very important at this point. And of course, Ogun wins. It always wins, right? So I think that notion and that adoption and the belief in Ogun, I think may have some kernel of inspiration in helping people bring, win over and gain their independence and get rid of slavery. So Vodou did, I think, to some extent, bring about, galvanize the people, brought them together, and give them a sense of common purpose.
Okay. When did the slavery end?
1804.
1804.
Yeah, the revolution started in 1791, and then it finally ended in 1804. And we often lose the thought, the idea that Napoleon sent some of his best troops to Haiti to fight the slaves, and they lost. Leclerc, who was Napoleon's brother-in-law, fought in Haiti. The idea was that he was going to send the troops to Haiti, quiet down the revolution, and then move on to Louisiana, because there was some trouble in Louisiana as well. Louisiana was then a French colony.
Yeah.
But the troops never got to Louisiana because they were all killed. Yeah. Some of them died of malaria and yellow fever, but the fact of the matter is the majority of them died because of the war, and they were killed in the war.
Okay, all right. Another question is, why do Haitians consider themselves Levites or the 12th tribe of Israel?
The Haitians do? No, I've never come across that. It may be that there are some small Protestant groups that may believe that, but certainly I think Haitians, in the large part, don't.
Okay.
They don't see themselves that way.
All right.
I think if you were to go to Judaism in Jamaica, I think there is a group of Jews in Jamaica, actually they're Jamaican black Jews in Jamaica, who actually believe that they're part of the 12 tribes, that they're descendants of the 12 tribes. But certainly I've never come across that in Haiti.
Okay.
And it may very well be that there are some Protestant groups that actually would believe that.
Okay.
Comes that.
All right. Okay. You have also been consultant on several documentary films.
Yes.
Can you tell us about some of those? Or
Well, I had a very good friend of mine who was a film producer in New York, and she had the idea of making a documentary on voodoo in New York City as it's practiced in New York. And at the time that we did it, there were some statistics that just come out that had shown actually that voodoo was one of the fastest growing religions in New York City. And we were quite baffled by that. And so we decided to do this, this documentary. And by the time we finished it, it's about 50 minutes long. By the time we finished it, it was actually won a prize, the Margaret Mead Prize, and we were very, very surprised at that. And we didn't think that it would happen. And then it was shown in various television stations. I believe occasionally they show it on A&E. I know I've seen it on A&E, and also in National Geographic.
Okay.
I don't know about the Science Channel, but National Geographic and A&E, I've seen it there. I've also done a documentary for a station in Canada. They were very interested in doing something on voodoo. So I didn't participate in making it. I was just interviewed in it. So these are the two principal ones that I've done.
Okay. So what do you think the interest is among people to do a documentary? Because you know, usually in order to do a documentary, they want to know that people are going to be interested in watching that. So why do you think there is so much interest in voodooism? Well,
I think there's a fascination of voodoo, primarily because of Hollywood. Hollywood has popularized it with wrong ideas, obviously, but there is some interest there. And the other is because you have a tremendous amount of people who are coming from Haiti and other parts of the world who are bringing the religion into places like New York City, Montreal, Toronto, and some of the large cities. And so, and of course the people, once they come, they bring their religion with them and they continue to practice it. So people in the larger community come into contact with these religions and become curious to find out what it's all about. So there is that interest there, and that's the reason why a lot of this documentary, well, not a lot, but some documentaries are made about voodoo. I would think that that would be the reason.
Okay. Do you think when, or do you know when people move into these areas and they begin to practice voodooism in New York or Montreal or other places in the United States specifically, is there any trouble with that? I mean, do Do they attract attention from outsiders that might be opposed to them being in their area?
Yeah, and in fact, let's take New York as an example. The people, the Haitians themselves, had felt so much so persecuted. Again, it's a matter of perspective, but rather perception. But they feel that way, and they feel so much that way that they have in fact tended to gather and to live together. And so what you have, for example, Haitians have tended to move, some Haitians have tended to move, and then rented apartments in one apartment building, and they all live together. And I visited some of these places, and it's a very interesting community. I mean, it's socialism at work in the best sense of the word. There's always one person, people go out to work, but there's one person left who takes care of the children when they come home from school. And you also have, in some cases, 1 or 2 kitchens. And they all get together and buy the food together. And so, but the children are raised really by somebody who's usually the elderly, the person who stays home and takes care of the children, make sure that they're taken care of, they do their homework, and so on, they come home from school. So that sense of being persecuted, perhaps, oppressed, discriminated against, I should say. And again, it's a matter of perception. I have tended to assemble a lot of these Haitians together into one area, one neighborhood, sometimes one city block, or within 2 or 3 houses of each other, or sometimes in one building. So they do the religious rituals, they do all the things that they have to do, and they go in frequently in each other's apartment to talk to be together and to do things together. It's a beautiful thing, I think.
Okay, great, wonderful. I know a lot of Protestant churches and maybe the Catholic Church as well send missionaries all over the world in different places. And I know Africa, probably in Haiti and Dominican Republic, some of those places are some that of the more focused areas that missionaries go to. What do you think? Do you think that's a benefit to those areas? What do you...
You've really hit a sensitive nerve with me.
Have I?
Yes, you have. But I think, personally, I think the missionaries, some missionaries have done a lot of harm. I think it would have been better if they had stayed home. The kind of Christian missions that I think have had a tremendous impact on people have been social medical services. You know, if a person goes as a Christian to strictly to convert people, I think that's harmful. I think people ought to be allowed to practice their own religions, and no one should really sway them by force or by conviction or But I think if a missionary goes because that's what he's called or she's called to do, to work in education and doing social work, public health work, or just simply working in a hospital or a doctor working in a hospital doing surgery, I think that's fine. If a person comes to a nurse and says, you know, you've come from somewhere else, why are you here? Then there is a questions that ask. Then I think the missionary can say, well, that's the reason I'm here. I'm here because of my belief. I'm here because I'm called upon to do that. I'm here because Jesus has taught me that this is what I must do for the world. But just strictly to go out and preach and form churches, I'm very much against that.
There's a book that I read. I've worked for nonprofits, and one of the ones I worked for here in Connecticut was called Faith Care, and they did send medical teams out
I know some
to
people who've
Africa
gone.
and Haiti and Dominican Republic and some other places. And while I was there, I read a book, and I don't remember the authors of the book, but it's called When Helping Hurts. And it was a really good book, and I think, you know, missionaries should read that, you know, because it talks about, you know, when you go into an area, you know, because you're going into somebody else's culture, you're going into their environment, and I think you have to realize that and not go in, you know, with the idea that you know it all and have it all and that you're going to give it to them.
Exactly.
You know, go in and learn who they are,
Right.
get to know them, get to love them, because, you know, people are beautiful and wonderful in all areas of the world.
I think I think a lot of the missionaries who've gone have also told people, especially among the poor, you know, you must accept your poverty. This is the way it is. That's what God wills for you, and you're going to be fine, because when you die, you certainly will go to inherit the kingdom of heaven. You'll go to heaven, and that way, it doesn't incite people to try hard to better themselves. And in a sense, it just pacifies people, and it de-energizes people. And that's what I don't like. I mean, particularly with evangelical, I think, Christianity. Not all of it,
not all.
I think some.
Absolutely not all. Right.
Yeah. Some.
Yeah, some. Yeah, I think, I mean, I have seen some where some of the children have grown up, especially with the medical field. Some of the children from those communities have grown up wanting to go and become a doctor themselves so that they could come back in their country or be in their country and continue to help their people. And that's the thing I like to see happen. So, yeah, that's great.
Well, I think doctors who go, very often they, obviously, I think they're used as models. And obviously, I mean, if a person goes and is a doctor and is a very good doctor, children usually will look at that person as a model and would want themselves to improve their own lot. And that's, I think, a much better example, a much better model than just simply to go and preach.
Right. Okay. All right. You have done numerous lectures on various things, both academic and non-academic.
Right.
Do you still do some of those lectures?
I do a lot of that, yeah. Right at the moment at our church, I'm doing a series on world religions. They wanted me to do something on voodoo, which I did on March 10th, but I've got Buddhism coming up in April, and I also have Hinduism coming sometime in the near future. So I do some of that in different places. Of course, you know, I'm even though I'm retired, I'm still quite active. I'm still publishing, I'm writing, I'm still doing research. I go to the library quite often. So that means then, you know, that I'm pretty active. So I've expanded, in fact, since I've retired, my whole field of research to include other religious traditions. Recently, I've just sent something out on the Rastafari, which I sent to the Oxford University Press, and it's not out yet. But I've also written about Judaism in the Caribbean. So my retirement has allowed me to do that, and as long as I'm sound in thinking, I can continue to work as long as I continue to think logically. As I tell my students, as long as I don't sit on a rocking chair and drool, that's the last thing in the world I want to do, you know, so.
And just keep right on going.
That's right.
That's right. That's wonderful. That's great. I'm going to go back to Haiti for just a minute with just the notion that it's often misunderstood as one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
And do you have any comments or thoughts about that, or how we can, or how those of us that aren't so familiar with Haiti could look at it, you know, differently, or possibly help?
Well, you know, the poverty in Haiti, a lot of people don't know that, but in the late 18th century, Haiti produced 65% of the sugar consumption in the world. 65%.
In the world?
In the world, 65%. That would have happened around 1750. So it was a very active, very, very wealthy colony for France. And it was on the basis of a lot of marketing and then trade that France could do with her neighbors that allowed her to build some of these beautiful things like Versailles and other places that they built in Europe. In France, a lot of the castles and so on. So a lot of monuments were done during that period. So Haiti was very wealthy, and it did extremely well. But after independence in 1804, we had a whole series of governments, not all of them, but many of them that tended to be corrupt. And so a lot of money was stolen from the government. And so you've had a whole series of revolutions that have taken place. And finally, in 1915 to 1934, the American troops had to come in for the first time in Haiti to bring about order in the country, civil order. So, and it was also to protect American investments. I mean, there were a number of investments, one of which was the Hasco Company, what's called the Haitian American Sugar Company, that was in Haiti and operating for quite a few years. So in order to protect all these investments that the United States had in Haiti and then operating under the Monroe Doctrine, so the troops, the Marines, came to Haiti and ruled Haiti actually from 1914 to 1934. So corrupt government has been one thing. I also have to say that I think a lot of countries in the world never got over the revolution that Haiti conducted, and that Haiti was the first black republic of the world. And it was the second independent country in the New World after the United States in 1776, and 1880 was 1804. So I think people really never, I think a lot of countries never really got over that, and even to this day. So the dealings and the trade and so on that have gone on with Haiti have not been fair. And so because of all that, I think Haiti has suffered a great deal in the past. But I'm not saying that it's all the poverty in Haiti, it's all the outsiders who have caused it, because Haitis have to take responsibilities for much of that as well. But they've had a lot of corrupt government, and that has not helped at all.
Right.
And a lot of dictatorships. And so it's caused a lot of problems, I think, in Haiti. The other part of that is also, you also have a class struggle. So you do have an upper class elite which has ruled the country for a very, very long time. In fact, probably throughout its history until recently. And these people have done very little to educate the lower classes. They have instituted their private schools, and they've sent the children in private schools, which have really provided the very best education to their own children. Sometimes they've been able to afford to send the children to study abroad. And a lot of the poor people have not had the money to do that, the money to do that. And so people have not been educated. And when I talk about that small elite group, I'm only talking about roughly about 6 to 8% of the population. But they were the rulers, and they have been the rulers. But they have not done very little. They've done very little to educate the masses. And that really, in a sense, that has not helped either. So that what you have now is a struggle of classes, and that people who are of the lower classes now have simply turned against the elite and have tried to usurp their position. And sometimes it's done in a very silent, quiet way. But its violence has been very much part of what's been happening recently in Haiti.
Okay. We're getting close to time to wrap up, but I have a couple of other questions, maybe even three. What do you know about do you know whether or not the only black passenger on the Titanic, whether or not he was Haitian?
Yes, he was Haitian, that's right. And in those days, of course, it would have to be done a lower deck, because blacks couldn't be on the upper decks.
Right.
Yeah, I forget his name, but yeah, there was a Haitian who was there on the Titanic when the Titanic went down. He died, yeah.
Okay. All right. And then, again, I might mess this up. Piatusane?
Pierre Toussaint, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he was one of the liberators. Are you
Okay.
talking about Toussaint, the one who was the general of the army during the time of the Revolution in 1791 to 1804?
That's a good question. That at the St. Patrick's Church, St. Catherine's Cathedral. Is that Sarah? Is that in New York or in New York?
That's in New York, yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not really familiar, but I know
Okay.
a little bit about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but there is a Toussaint who I believe has been canonized and by the Catholic Church.
Okay. Yeah. That's the
So,
one
but
she's
this
talking
is
about.
something that happened in the past 12, 15 years or so. Yeah, and was recognized for miracles that he's done, but I know very little about
Okay.
it. Maybe
All
this
right.
is something that I ought to look at.
And then how about, are you familiar with Audubon, who founded Chicago? Is that?
No,
No?
actually Audubon, you know, the bird guy, he was Haitian.
Okay.
We don't know, that's not part that nobody talks about that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and he was the one who founded the Audubon Society.
Huh. I didn't
He
realize
was a
he was
Haitian.
Haitian.
Yeah, he was born in Haiti. That's
How
correct.
about that?
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very interesting and educational.
Thank you. Well, it's been my pleasure.
I think the world religions that you're doing, the studies that you're doing at your church would be very interesting as well to attend and hear more about those. So
So
thank
people are
you.
interested, April 28th.
April 28th.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's on Buddhism.
Wonderful. And what is the church? That
The Asylum Hill Congregational Church
Okay.
in Hartford.
Asylum Hill in Hartford. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome. And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean for the Nonprofit World, encouraging you to embrace your passion and make a difference in someone's life today. Thank you for joining us.